Have you ever had a New England ancestor who just vanishes? 1 minute, you've tracked them meticulously through a decade of census records, and the next, they're gone without a trace. Or my personal favorite, you find two men with the exact same name in the same small town, born in the same year, and you spend weeks trying to figure out which one is your fourth great grandfather. It's one of the most common and deeply frustrating experiences in American genealogy, a brick wall, so to speak, that's so solid it feels like it's been there for centuries, because in a way it has. But what if the solution to your research problem isn't about finding a new secret database of documents? What if the real answer is buried in the 400-year-old history of how these towns were even settled? What if the key isn't just what record you're looking for, but understanding why the records were created the way they were in the first place, and why so many seem to be missing? The unique way New England was colonized, beginning with the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, created a distinct series of genealogical puzzles that continue to stump even the most experienced researchers. These aren't just random missing pieces of bad luck. They are predictable patterns born directly from the Puritan culture, their religious fervor, and the politics of the 17th and 18th centuries. The clues to your family tree are very often hiding in plain sight, but they are written in a historical code. So in this video, we're going to unlock these puzzles. I'll show you why stepping back from the endless searching and learning to think like a historian is the real most effective key to finally smashing those colonial brick walls. Today, on Trace Your New England Roots. Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Eric with Trace Your New England Roots. First, I have to apologize for some of the background noise. We have had some windy weather in New England over the past couple of days, and a cleanup crew is doing some tree work down the street. If you're born from New England, I hope that you didn't receive too much damage. And if you do hail from other regions, this is just a wonderful example of what we New Englanders experience with our unpredictable weather. In our last video, we explored how colonial rule actively shaped and often distorted genealogical records, creating significant challenges for researchers today. It highlighted the ways census data, land deeds, and name changes were used as tools of control to erase or alter identities, especially among the indigenous peoples and the descendants of enslaved Africans. We also discussed the resilience of these communities through oral histories and some of the modern tools like DNA testing to reclaim lost family connections. This context helps genealogists understand why records can be inconsistent and encourages a critical approach to family history research. Now that we've uncovered how colonial systems shaped and often obscured our family histories, it's time to shift gears here. In this video, we'll take a step back from the records themselves and explore how thinking like a historian can help you break through those frustrating brick walls in your New England genealogy research. Sometimes the key isn't just more searching, but rather a fresh perspective on how to analyze and connect the pieces you already have. So let's dive in and unlock these puzzles together. Puzzle number one, the town, not the country. All right, folks, the very first conceptual mistake that trips up almost every researcher, especially if your family comes from other parts of the United States, is where you look for records. In most of America, from Pennsylvania to Georgia to the Midwest, the county is king. It's the seat of the government, the keeper of the deeds, the filer of wills, the place where all major life events are recorded. So you find an ancestor in Hartford, Connecticut, and your first logical instinct is to search the Hartford County records. But in New England, that's usually the wrong move. And it's a mistake that can cost you years of fruitless searching. From day one, the absolute center of Puritan life, and then therefore record keeping, was the town. When the first colonists arrived, they didn't scatter across the landscape. They built their entire society around two central institutions, the church and the town meeting. The town clerk was one of the first and most vital positions established, and that single individual was tasked with recording everything. We're talking births, marriages, deaths, and of course, but all of those, but also the division of land among the town proprietors. The minutes of every town meeting, local tax bills, and even the unique earmarks, the specific notches and slits cut into the ears of livestock that farmers used to identify their cattle and pigs. This is where it gets wonderfully and maddeningly confusing, because each New England colony and later state, they did things a little differently. For example, in Rhode Island, a colony founded on the principle of fierce independence, pretty much everything, land records, probate files, and vital records, all of these were held at the town level. They still are to this day for the most part. Now head over to Colonial, Massachusetts, and you'll find deeds recorded at the county level, but the vital records for births, marriages, and deaths are filed back in the town clerk's office. Then in Connecticut, it gets even more complicated. Deeds are recorded in the town, But wills and probate matters were handled by probate districts, which were unique jurisdictions that often ignored county lines and could change their boundaries over time. So that will that you can't find for your ancestor at the county courthouse, well, it might be filed in a probate district that covers a sliver of 3 different counties, or it could simply be sitting in a box of unorganized papers at the local town hall. Those early land grants weren't always in a fancy leather-bound deed book. They were frequently just a single line item in the town meeting minutes, where the town proprietors voted to grant a newcomer a plot of land to build a house. This isn't just an administrative quirk. It's a direct reflection of a society that valued local community control above all else. Power was held in the community, and so were its most important records. The first key is to fundamentally shift your focus. Stop thinking county and start thinking town. Your ancestors didn't just live in Fairfield County. They may have lived in the town of Stratford. They weren't from York County. They were from Kittery. Go deep into the records of that single town, because that's where its life was chronicled. That's where your ancestor's story is waiting for you. Puzzle number 2, the Great Migration and the small name pool. Okay, so you've adjusted your thinking now and narrowed your search to the right town. You're looking for your ancestor, John Smith, who was born around 1720. You dive into the records and you find him. And in fact, you find 3 of him in the same small town, all born within a 5-year window of each other. How do you begin to untangle that knot? Well, this is the second great puzzle of New England genealogy. A shockingly small and repetitive name pool that it creates a genealogical chaos. The problem's roots go all the way back to what they call the Great Migration. It's the period between the years 1620 and 1640, when about 20,000 English Puritans poured into New England. Crucially, they weren't a diverse crowd. They mostly came from a specific region of England, primarily what's called East Anglia, and they shared a common zealous religious identity and a distinct regional culture. That also meant they shared a common and very, very limited set of acceptable first names. The Puritans loved biblical names, particularly from the Old Testament, and they actively rejected the Catholic tradition of naming children after saints. In 17th century Boston, a staggering 90% of all male and female first names were taken directly from the Bible. We're talking an endless seas of John, Joseph, Samuel, William, Mary, Elizabeth, Sarah, and Hannah. Now they might occasionally get creative with what are called virtue names like Faith, Hope, Patience, or Mercy. And in very rare very awesome cases, you'll find bizarre names like flea fornication, or Job raked out of the ashes, or Job raked out of the ashes. But for the most part, they did stick to the classics. This alone created towns full of people with the same name. But it gets worse, folks. Thanks to Puritan naming customs, which were all about honoring the immediate family, they rejected the English tradition of naming children after godparents, and instead looked to the parents and the grandparents. It was incredibly common, almost expected, to name the first son after his father and the first daughter after her mother. One demographic study of Hingham, Massachusetts found that nearly 3/4 of all firstborn daughters were named after their mothers. Then you have the heartbreaking and confusing practice of necronyms. When a child died young, it was standard practice to give the exact same name to the next baby born of the same sex. So you'll often see a family with a son named Samuel who died in 1740, and then another son named Samuel born in 1742. Without finding that first child's death record, it's nearly impossible to make sense of the family structure. For example, the Hartwell family of Concord, Massachusetts provides a tragic example. They lost all 5 of their young children to illness in 1740. When nine more children were subsequently born, they systematically reused the name of every single child who had died. Now, picture this playing out over generations. You have John Smith, who names his first son John. That son, John Jr., also names his first son John. Meanwhile, the original John Sr.'s brother William also has a son he dutifully names John, after his own father. In just 2 generations, you have a small town crawling with 4 or 5 men named John Smith. They're all cousins of varying degrees. In the records, they're only distinguished by vague temporary terms like senior, junior, or maybe an occupation like John Smith the weaver, or a location like John Smith of the mill. This is that brick wall. To break it down, you have to stop looking for one person and start reconstructing entire families, meticulously tracking siblings and using land records and wills to figure out which John is which. All right, we're now halfway through, and hopefully you're already getting some new ideas for tackling your own research challenges. If these historical tips are helping you to reframe your brick walls, it would mean a lot to me if you take a quick second to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We've still got 2 more major colonial puzzles to decode here, and fair warning, they get even more complex. Now, let's talk about what happened when faith and family feuds literally redrew the map of New England. Puzzle number 3, the fracturing of faith in towns. So let's imagine your ancestor, who is a respected deacon in the church, suddenly he just vanishes from all town records in Salem, Massachusetts around the year 1695. There's no death record, no burial information, there's no will probated in the county. Well, where on earth did he go? The answer might not be in a cemetery, but hidden in the minutes of a long forgotten and bitter religious argument. This is our third puzzle. How intense church fights led to mass migrations, the founding of new towns, and the scattering of records. The Puritans came to America to build what they called a city upon a hill. It was their version of a perfect, godly society. The key word there is their version. They had very specific, very inflexible ideas about theology, governance, and morality, and that rigidity was a perfect recipe for conflict. When a pastor or group of families disagreed with the established doctrine or leadership in their town, they didn't just switch to the church down the road. There wasn't even one. There wasn't even another church. Instead, they left. They would pack up their belongings, gather their allies, and often, under the leadership of a charismatic but controversial minister, carve a whole new town out of the wilderness. The most famous examples of this process created new colonies. For example, Roger Williams was famously banished from Massachusetts for his so-called dangerous ideas about the separation of church and state and the belief that land should be purchased from Native Americans. So he went off to found Providence and the colony of Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson's theological battles, where she challenged the authority of the ministers, got her exiled. So she helped establish Portsmouth, Rhode Island. Another example, Reverend Thomas Hooker led about 100 people and their livestock overland from what is now Cambridge, Massachusetts, to found Hartford, Connecticut. All because of a fundamental disagreement over who should be allowed to vote in civic affairs. But this didn't just happen on a grand colony founding scale. It happened all the time at the local level. A fierce fight over a minister's salary, a dispute over where to build a new, larger meeting house, or a seemingly tiny point of theological doctrine could literally split a town in two. The families in the western part of town, tired of traveling for miles to attend church, well, they might break off to form their own parish and eventually petition the general court to become their own incorporated town. For example, the town of Dedham, Massachusetts is a classic case. It ended up spawning more than a dozen other towns over the years as its population grew and fractured over religious and geographic lines. For a genealogist, this is a potential nightmare. Your family might be consistently documented in the Salem records for 50 years straight. But after a major church schism in 1695, your ancestor, a deacon on the losing side of the argument, might have followed his favored minister to found the new settlement of Middlefield. And just like that, all future records for that entire branch of the family, the births, the marriages, the deaths, wills, and land sales, are gone from Salem forever. The trail goes cold in one place, only because it picks up in a completely different town, maybe even in a different colony, under a new name. To solve this, you have to become a historian of the church itself. Who is the minister at that time? Are there disputes recorded in the church or town meeting minutes? Did a large group of affiliated families all disappear from the records at the same time? Following this paper trail of religious drama is often the only way to follow the migration trail of your ancestors. Puzzle number 4, the chaos of colonial records. Even when you find the right records in the right town for the right person, you're often faced with one last maddening puzzle: the wonderfully chaotic and frustrating nature of the documents themselves. We today have this romanticized image of stoic Puritans with quill pens neatly writing down every detail of their lives in sturdy leather-bound books. The reality was so much messier, more fragile, and more haphazard. First, there's the simple, brutal problem of large-scale record loss. Town halls and churches were wooden buildings, lit by open flame candles and heated by roaring fireplaces. You can see where this is going, folks. Fires were devastatingly common, and a single stray ember on a windy night could destroy 150 years of a town's collected history in a single blaze. Wars also took a massive toll. During devastating conflicts like the King Philip's War in the 1670s, or the Revolutionary War a century later, entire towns were burned to the ground, taking every deed, will, and vital record with them. Sometimes records were simply lost to neglect, water damage, or even rodents over the centuries. Then you have the sheer joy of colonial boundary disputes. For decades, the border between New Hampshire and Massachusetts was a hot, confusing mess based on vague instructions in their royal charters. A family living in a town like Dunstable might have a child's birth recorded in Massachusetts, their marriage recorded in New Hampshire, and their will filed back in a Massachusetts court, all without ever moving an inch. The borders literally shifted around them, leaving a chaotic trail of records that forces you to search in the archives of multiple states. And folks, never forget that Maine was legally just part of Massachusetts until the year 1820. So tons of early Maine records are actually hiding in Massachusetts archives in Boston. A fact that has honestly stumped countless researchers. And even the records that do survive can be incredibly cryptic. Early land deeds don't use neat survey lines or what we have today with GPS coordinates. They describe a property as, quote, running from the great oak tree by the river, thence to the stone wall by Goodman Brown's meadow, thence to a pile of stones. This is beautiful prose, but it's not super helpful 300 years later when the tree is gone and the wall has crumbled. You might find a Sarah Smith who witnessed a will. Is that the wife, the daughter, a sister, or a cousin of the person who died? The record often won't tell you, as relationships were assumed to be common knowledge. You you have to piece it together from other clues. This is exactly where researching the collateral lines, the siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins of your direct ancestor becomes your absolute superpower. An uncle's will might be the one and only document that names all of your ancestors' children, finally breaking down that brick wall. A sibling's land record might mention that their property borders your ancestors' farm, confirming their location in the town. You simply cannot rely on a single document or a single name search. You have to build a case like a detective, assembling dozens of small, imperfect clues from a whole mess of sources to see the full, complicated picture of a family's life. So, how do you solve these 400-year-old puzzles? The solution isn't some secret database or a magical, undiscovered record. The solution is to fundamentally change your mindset. The key is to stop thinking like a name collector chasing after one individual and start thinking like a historian, trying to understand an entire community. So the next time you hit a brick wall with a New England ancestor, don't just search for their name again in the same database. Stop and research the town itself. Go find a published town history, often written in the 19th century. Reading its founding story, was it born from a church fight? Who were the first proprietors of the town? Then look at old maps to see how its boundaries and neighborhoods changed over time. Find out if the courthouse or town hall ever burned down, or if the town's records have been published or microfilmed. Understanding the specific local world your ancestor lived in is the single most powerful and effective tool you have. This is the work that finally breaks down the biggest brick walls. It's not about finding one perfect record. It's about understanding the complex, often messy world that created those records in the first place. The clues you need are there, but they aren't just in the names and dates. They're hidden in the religious conflicts, the mass migrations, the naming patterns, and the very structure of colonial life. By learning to see your family story as part of that larger, richer history, you can finally uncover the answers you're looking for. What's the biggest New England brick wall you've ever hit? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear. I really want to hear what puzzles you're working on currently. And if this video helped you think about your research in a new way, be sure to subscribe for more tips on breaking through your genealogical challenges. Thanks for watching. This again is Eric with Trace Your New England Roots, where history starts with your family.